This episode is brought to you by Alexis Night Photography. Alexis is an award-winning lifestyle, brand, and wedding photographer based in the Cotswolds, England, specializing in headshots, family shoots, and event photography. Alexis has over 20 years experience. You can find her work and contact her for all your photography needs at alexisnight.co.uk. That's Alexis, KNIGHT.co.uk.
We are also brought to you by Design Weaver Textiles. Based in the heart of the Cotswolds, Philippa Weaver of Design Weaver Textiles is a hand-tufted rug designer and maker with a passion for British craftsmanship. With 20 years of experience designing carpet for high-end hospitality, she is uniquely suited to bring a fully bespoke design and make service to you, taking care at each stage to provide a beautiful and truly unique work of art to your interior landscape. You can find her on Instagram at Design Weaver Tex. Again, that's at Design Weaver Tex.
We are also brought to you by Vanguard Cattle. Vanguard is a small, family-owned beef operation located in the heart of Texas. Their primary focus is on registered Santa Gertrudis cattle for superior genetics, bull and female replacement for commercial cattlemen and meat production. Vanguard's family roots date back to the days prior to the Republic of Texas. They take much pride in offering strong, sound genetics and beef to other Texas families. You can find them on Instagram and Facebook at Vanguard_cattle or via email at vanguardcattle@gmail.com. Once again, that's at Vanguard_cattle or via email at vanguardcattle@gmail.com. You're listening to the Based on History podcast.
All units, Irene. I say again, Irene.
And we're going to kick him in the ass. We're going to kick the hell out of him all the time, and we're going to go through him like crap through a goose.
You tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me! That they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom! Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained? Is this not why you are here?
Howdy everyone, welcome back to the Based on History podcast. As always, I'm your host, John Nyack, and joining me once again is my brother Mark, and today we are going to be doing the Kingdom of Heaven episode. And if you haven't listened to the Based on History mini about what's leading up to the events of the movie, go listen to that one first. It'll give you a bunch of history leading up to and give you some context as to why the events of the movie are happening and some of the background and some of the people. But like I said, we're doing Kingdom of Heaven. So first we're going to just talk about some of the things we liked about the movie and just some little tidbits about the movie. And then we'll kind of dive into the history as usual. So Mark, I mean, we both love this movie. I would say it's a little more near and dear to your heart than it is to mine. As much as I love it, it is probably one of your top 5 movies of all time that you love. I mean, do you remember the first time you watched it? I mean, we didn't see it in the movie theaters. Did we watch it at home or something like that?
Yeah, we rented it one time, probably from Blockbuster.
Yeah.
We probably got a late fee for it.
R.I.P. R.I.P.
To me, I was kind of shocked that when we rented it, because it's an epic film, right? It's grand in scale and the story that it tells. They didn't spare any expenses with special effects or cheap costumes, and it's a stacked cast of A-listers.
I mean, it's the Gladiator of medieval of the Crusades,
right? And so I kind of remember wondering, like, why didn't I see previews for this? Why didn't I hear more about it? Why didn't you ever hear someone say, "Hey, you've got to go see this movie in the theaters"?
Right.
And so I'm not claiming it's the greatest movie ever made, but I do believe that it's one of the most underrated epic films. If you have Braveheart and Gladiator and movies like that, I think it belongs in that category.
I do too.
It's cinematic value for overall time. Maybe it's not up there with Gladiator, but
in some ways, it's grander than Gladiator.
Right, covers a longer period of time.
Well, just like even on the scale, because and I don't want to bash Gladiator because Gladiator is great. It's amazing. But when you look at when you actually look in the background at that first, like the biggest battle, because the rest of them are all actually pretty small because they take place in like a coliseum or a fighting pit, kind of a thing. When you actually look in the background of the fighting in the first Battle of Gladiator, it's smaller. You can tell they're filming it to make it look bigger than the actual number of human beings that are there. And when you watch Kingdom of Heaven, there's so many wide shots of massive, and maybe some of it might be CGI or superimposed or whatever it is, but it is on a grander scale. It's a huge frame of things that are going on.
Right. It's big in scale. It's got lots of great cinematic shots.
Right.
And then the other thing that I loved about it was, when I got into history, the first era that I sort of latched onto was medieval history.
Right.
And we've talked about this before. There aren't a lot of what I would call great medieval films.
No.
And most of them, even the ones that we like, they're typically box office flops.
Yes.
Or maybe they break even. So the movies we grew up with, which I still love this movie to this day, but Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was like all we had for a long time. Then Braveheart, which now you can certainly pick apart Braveheart,
which we did,
which
I did in episode 1.
But on terms of scale and quality, it was huge, and there wasn't, and it was serious.
Yes.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves isn't completely.
It's
serious.
an action comedy,
right?
Yeah.
And so Kingdom of Heaven was in that neighborhood, but at a different level. It's like, wow, finally this era that I like that never gets shown very well in movies. And it almost should be like the poster child for a grand medieval film.
Right, I agree.
And most people I know have never seen it. Half the friends I know that have seen it, they joke that they've only seen it because I made them watch it. Mm-hmm. So, it was a movie that kind of stood out. There's a lot of movies that Gladiator, and that's Roman times, doesn't even really compare to it in terms of a high-quality medieval film.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some other, just not even just like high quality, but just other medieval films in general. And there's not that many in our lifetime. Of course, when you go back, I mean, you've got like El Cid, and there's even a movie, I think it's on Netflix right now. It's called Saladin. It's about him, but that's from like the 60s or something like that. There was a movie that I watched one time. It's either like Danish, or it's called Arn. Arn Knights Templar.
Arn Knights Templar, yeah.
And
it's all right.
It's all right. But even then, when they film their battles, you can tell there's not that many people on the field of battle, and they do a lot of close-ups to make it seem like there's more people there than there really are.
And what's the one with the siege, and especially the Magnificent Seven, but for medieval times? It's like 7 guys in the little castle, and King John is trying to take it. It's like Nightfall. Is it No, Nightfall's the show. You know what I'm talking about. It popped up on Netflix one day. It's got the Templar who took the vow of silence.
It's got the guy. He's Prince Edward the Black or whatever.
In Knight's Tale.
Yeah,
another great medieval film that's also a comedy.
Yes,
Paul Giamatti's King John.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's about the Barons' War, right?
It's basically Magnificent Seven, but medieval times.
Yes, and why can't we remember? I know exactly what movie you're talking about because you and I were talking about it not that long ago.
Yeah, but the fact that we can't remember the name of it proves this thing was not going to win Academy Awards.
No.
Even the new Russell Crowe Robin Hood, which I really like. There's enough things in it that bring it down a notch, though, from being a truly great film.
I love the new Robin Hood with Russell Crowe. There are some things that I love about it, but exactly like you said, there are a few little things that I'm like, that's kind of corny.
Yes, there's just enough in it that it's like, man, why did they do that?
Yes.
And it seems like a lot of medieval films are like that. It's like, this is enjoyable, but why did they have to do that? That's... The King, the new one on Netflix about Henry V. That's not bad, but it's a drama. But...
It was so the King is a modern retelling of Shakespeare's Henry V. So they are not telling the actual story. So they have all those Shakespearean things in there that aren't actually historically accurate to make it more drama and everything like that. So it has a feel of the way they film it that they're retelling the actual story of the Battle of Agincourt and the lead up to it. But really, it's just a non-Shakespearean retelling.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I liked this movie. It was serious, it was epic. There's not really corny parts. There's a few artsy bits here and there, like just kind of a flashing scene that goes from sort of cinematic to artsy, in my opinion. But other than that, it's like a few seconds here and there in a movie that's 3 hours long. So that's why I always liked this film.
Yeah, I mean, it has the quality that you need to have for this movie, because if it didn't have the quality, it would be bad.
Right.
And so when you have a director like Ridley Scott, who did do Gladiator, and he also did the new Robin Hood.
Yeah. I think he also did the Last Duel. Didn't he just do the Last Duel?
Yes. Yeah.
Which has a lot to not like, but
it's the only. I mean, the only scene I really liked was the Last Duel of the thing, because when you read the retelling that the like herald or biographer or whatever it was that like chronicled the Last Duel, he basically does it word for word. Yeah. And in that movie, not 100%, I would say like 90-95%, they basically just recreate that telling of the Last Duel. So that's pretty cool. The movie itself, not that great. It's pretty
slow.
It's pretty woke as well, in my opinion. But yes, it's very slow. It's very slow. But I mean, we just talked about all of these new movies that have come out that are medieval movies. But in my mind, still, there has not been another medieval film that has come out like Kingdom of Heaven.
And Kingdom of Heaven came out what year?
2005.
Right, so it came out before basically everything we just mentioned, except for Braveheart and Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yeah, and Gladiator.
And Gladiator, right? Yeah, so everything that we just mentioned, when this movie came out, you didn't even have those.
No.
If you liked them or didn't like them, and so I guess you could pull up El Cid from with Charlton Heston strapped to a horse as a dead guy, riding down the beach.
Well, funny enough, because in the last the mini that we talked about why Spain's not there because they're doing their. I mean, that's El Cid,
right? Yeah, they're rough contemporaries of the Crusades. Yeah, at this time. So,
well, let's talk about just like some of the cast. Obviously, the main guy is Orlando Bloom. He is fresh off of Pirates of the Caribbean, and he did Black Hawk Down with Ridley Scott as well. Obviously, he has a very small role in that.
And he's been Legolas at this point, right?
He's been Legolas at this point. You know, it's really kind of his, like, it's Orlando Bloom's heyday right now.
Right. It was meant to be his Gladiator. It was meant to be his serious epic.
Yep.
That came after all these great performances where he's either a supporting actor or it was good, but it's fantasy.
Right.
Or something like that.
I mean, to be completely honest, I didn't take Orlando Bloom... And I don't mean this as a slight towards him, but I don't take him as a serious, dramatic actor. And I give him pretty good amount of credit for this film.
Oh, yeah, he's great in it.
I think he's great in it. I mean, because, like, you view him as Legolas or Will from Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yep.
You know, and then you have this, and he's like, I mean, I hate to say that he's not a boy in those movies.
Right.
But he's a young man. And he's a young man in this one too, but he is a leading man. And he carries the film, because you could think that it might be too much for him at that time.
Yeah, and he's even as Legolas is very clean and long blonde hair. He's elf,
right.
and then it's like boppy bounce around fun pirates. And this one he's supposed to be this like big gritty baron who leads knights in battle, and it's pretty believable. Like he doesn't look like a fish out of water.
No, I
as a crusader.
Yes, I agree. I think he does a great job. And not to just like talk about his body, but there's one scene where he doesn't have his shirt on, and he's beefed up a little.
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, he looks.
He's not the skinny Will Turner, right? And not the skinny Legolas.
He's not wearing tights anymore.
Yeah.
He's dressed like Aragorn, essentially. Is what he is.
He's the Aragorn of this film.
Yeah.
And then so the one actor in the movie that I was like, oh man, is Liam Neeson. Because Liam Neeson is awesome.
Oh, he's awesome in it.
And he feels that, like, the way they dress him and how he walks and carries himself. Plus, it's like, Liam Neeson's a big dude anyway. He's like 6'4" or something like that. And then he dies off in the, basically the first real scene of the movie. The
movie has very clear phases. And he's gone by the end of phase 1. Yeah. And he doesn't make it to the central plot.
Well, We'll talk. I mean, we can talk because this scene doesn't happen in real life, right? When they're in the woods and they get ambushed by the bishop's men or whatever. But I was always like, man, Liam Neeson's got this awesome group of like mercenaries, like from all different. Each one's a very, not caricature is not the right word, but representation of a different part of the world,
the medieval world,
world at that time. He's got a Knight's Hospitaller with him. He's got a Viking-esque guy from
the German
German dude. He's got
the Saracen,
and then
he's a baron from the Crusades,
right? And then he's got the other like knight at arms guy.
Oh yeah, almost like a squire,
guy. Yeah, and it's just like checkbox,
Squire who uses a bow.
Yeah.
Saracen who has a curved blade.
Right.
German with a Viking sword.
Yeah,
exactly.
They're almost like a little Magnificent Seven medieval.
Well, you
Force 10 from Navarone, like
right. If you'd never seen the movie before, you might think it's about to be a movie about this band of guys going on an adventure.
That is exactly what I thought it was when I watched. I was like, oh man, this is gonna be awesome. These guys are gonna be running around doing adventure stuff, and then they all die.
Yeah, then they don't make it to a single adventure.
No, yeah, like Orlando Bloom's character is the only one of that group that makes it to the Holy Land, because the one guy who, other than
the
Hospitaller, sorry, but we can talk about his character later and how what he represents and stuff like that.
Some of the fan theories about
the fan theories, yeah. But that Sergeant at Arms or whatever that survives the battle as well. I guess he dies on the boat.
Right. Yeah. He's just
gone
during the shipwreck. I
yeah.
guess. Yeah. That's one of those artsy moments. Is the shipwreck?
Yes.
That I don't love, but yeah.
Okay, so who else do we?
Jeremy Irons.
Jeremy Irons. He plays Tiberius in the film. That's a fake character. He's based on Raymond of Tripoli.
Yep.
And when you look at what Raymond of Tripoli does, it's essentially what Jeremy Irons' character of Tiberius does throughout the film. There are some differences, but that's essentially who he is.
It's Ava Green. It's sort of this and Casino Royale, where she's a Bond girl. These are because she had mostly, I think, done French films because she's French from real life. But she had this was one of her breakout roles. Like, oh, this is not just a French girl who does French movies.
Right.
This is a serious actress who can handle the epics and a leading lady role. Yep. And she did. And so, and then she was a Bond girl, and that's typically kind of big for your career. It launches you as basically announces you as a pretty woman.
Right.
And
so as a sex symbol.
Right. It is. But those came out kind of around the same time, so this was her big breakout, and I think she's a phenomenal actress.
I do as well.
And then it's got
Brendan Gleeson, who plays Amish in Braveheart. He plays Renaud de Chatillon,
which is an angry Amish.
Yes,
a big redheaded knight.
He also plays Menelaus in Troy.
Yes,
who's a Greek Amish.
Yeah. We need a big angry man with red hair. Yeah, all right, get Brendan Gleeson.
Right.
He's also in Bruges with Colin Farrell.
And
he's Mad-Eye Moody in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
That's what he is.
Right.
It's so who's the tall man at arms who's bald? And I think
he's the French second in command henchman in Ridley Scott's Robin Hood. Like he tries to rape Maid Mary, and he gets pushed back. And
and then she stabs him.
Then she stabs him.
Well, he's not the Egyptian guy in The Mummy.
That's not him. Okay, different guys. They do look similar. And when I was young, I actually thought it was the same guy.
Okay.
But the guy who plays the Mummy, he's actually South African.
Okay. So no, I mean the Magi guy.
Oh, the Magi guy. No, also a different guy.
Okay. And then his little squire that we were talking about who dies in the shipwreck. For anyone that's seen the show Rome, which oddly enough, if you've seen it, this will surprise you, got canceled for being too expensive because it doesn't look like that's a reason the show should have been canceled. He's one of the two main characters.
I haven't seen it.
Oh, okay. He's like a former centurion.
Is he a real character or is he a made up character?
I don't believe so. I think he's a filler guy. Him and his buddy Titus Polo. These two ex-Roman soldiers who are frenemies, they butt heads, but they're sort of they are witnesses to all these famous moments in Roman.
So they're Forrest Gumping their way through Rome.
Yes, it's a Roman Forrest Gump. That's exactly what it is. And he was also in Grey's Anatomy.
He's one of the doctors in Grey's Anatomy.
One of the doctors, great. Yeah, and he's I think he marries McDreamy's sister. For all you Grey's Anatomy fans out there,
how do you know that?
I'm missing an episode here and there.
Another cameo at the end is Jorah Mormont as Richard the
Lionheart.
Lionheart.
Yes. And then Balion's brother at the beginning, the priest.
Oh yeah, Michael Sheen.
Yeah, he's the
Lycan. What's his name? Lucian. He's Lucian in Underworld.
Rise of the Lycans. And he's actually been in a lot of things.
Well, yeah, I mean he's a great actor. He's in a ton of things.
Right.
So I read I saw this on IMDb, but apparently he tried out and auditioned for the role of Balian
Oh.
and didn't get it, so they gave him his corrupt priest brother.
Yeah, who gets killed.
Yeah, he's got like one scene.
Yeah. So extended edition, which I highly recommend you watch the extended edition.
And we'll talk more about the extended edition as
adds
we
a
go
lot
through.
of character development at the beginning and kind of at the end. He has a couple more lines, and you realize how cruddy and corrupt of a person he is. Whereas in the regular edition, it's like
We're supposed to be his brother, right?
it is his brother, and he's clearly jealous of Balian because Balian never gets excited, has control of his emotions, and Balian is actually like locked up kind of in a solitary confinement thing. The bishop wants him to leave. He's like, you've done your time. Like you're just sad because of your wife. You haven't done anything wrong, and I really need you to help finish building my church. His brother, Michael Sheen, he's like, okay, deal. I'll go tell him. And then he goes to Balian and he's like, you need to stay in longer. Like he doesn't do what the bishop tells him to.
Man.
Yeah, I know he's real corrupt. And anyways, we can go into it as we go through the movie more.
Yeah.
Anyways, highly recommend the extended edition. Yes, adds about a half hour, but it's worth it.
So you're getting close to 4 hours on this movie.
Maybe.
now, which I think, especially people like you and me that like history, don't mind long movies. I've never
Right.
I have never seen a good movie that was long and thought, oh man, I just wish it was shorter.
Right.
Even, I mean, like
Maybe the very end of Return of the King.
maybe. I mean, honestly, I want the Scourge of the Shire. I wish they would have put Tom Bombadil in.
Oh, gosh.
No, I'm just joking. But what was it? Even like people like Harry Potter fans, and the Harry Potter movies are fairly long, but always they're like, I'd watch a 3-hour long Harry Potter movie because like yes, they're not the same, but Harry Potter movies are good. They're good. They're good movies.
Yeah, if it's a good movie, no one is hoping it's shorter.
Right.
If it's a truly good movie.
So if you're a history fan and you like sweeping epics, you're not going to mind an extra 30-40 minutes of Kingdom of Heaven.
And they really do add to the plot. They add some depth. They paint certain characters in a totally different light. Some that you might like that you kind of think, oh, hey, man, they're really not so great anymore. So definitely worth the watch.
Some of the technical things about the movie that I always thought was cool is like, and I guess I credit Lord of the Rings with this. Not Braveheart, because their armor is absolutely horrendously fantasy made up armor for Braveheart. Right. It's terrible. Covered that in an episode as well. But Lord of the Rings is the first one they got, the Weta Workshop in New Zealand to make all the armor for Lord of the Rings. And all the chainmail and and all the mail in Lord of the Rings is all real mail. And this movie has some of the best mail that you will see. And I think, and especially at this, now they do get some armor wrong. We can talk about that, and we'll do that on the armor and tactics episode. But they're not wearing Agincourt style breastplates. They're not wearing Knight's Tale, knight armor. This is early medieval time, and they are all only wearing chain
mail hauberks, essentially. Big. About as fancy as it gets is like, instead of ending at your wrist, there's a kind of a mitten part that comes over, and instead of going around your face, there might be like a mail coif or what covers your neck or your face. That kind of comes over. But no plate, nothing that looks like it was the sword pulled out of the stone, crazy long, two-handed or anything like that.
It's just kind of funny because people you go back and you look at Rome and they're wearing plate armor, right? And I almost said the Ottomans, but the Byzantines are wearing especially their cataphracts are wearing
heavy scale.
Yeah, scale and some type of plate armor, but the fall of the Western Roman Empire and a lot of things armor ebbs and flows, right? And so and weapons evolve and tactics evolve and things like that. And so they've lost some of that technology, not all of it, because when you really dive into it, the Western world had the capabilities to do things just like the Eastern world did and all of those types of things. But it was just not readily available to be able for the Western Europeans to make plate armor. And so when you look at it, it's just an ebb and flow of history. And right now, they just weren't making plate armor. They weren't using it. It was expensive, and even if they were making it, only a few people would have it anyways.
Right.
And at this time, they're all just wearing mail.
Right. And with the exception of crossbows, which are just starting to become super widespread use. At this time.
When the First Crusade, they had no crossbows. Now they do have
Right.
crossbows.
Right, and they had been invented, but yeah, before they became like a mainstay on the European battlefield, and this is well before the era of the English longbowmen. Even with this mail, Hollywood has tricked us into thinking armor essentially doesn't work.
Right.
It does work. No one would voluntarily wear heavy stuff
Exactly.
like that if it didn't work. And there's a reason only the wealthiest wore it. That means it worked. So before crossbows became widespread, a nobleman or a knight or a mounted arms, which is a heavily armored horseman, would go into a medieval battlefield in this era in what they call the High Middle Ages, expecting to live.
Right.
The swords at the time, if you can see the tips are kind of rounded, so that they don't have a lot of piercing abilities. Spears even that a peasant might wield or something like that. Before the crossbow comes, you're expecting that this mail will keep you alive, and if you rather than die, you might get captured and ransomed.
Right.
You're not getting murdered on the battlefield.
We'll talk about the ransom later on because like the movie doesn't do that great of a job of. I mean, and not that it had to. Right. It wasn't like the goal of the movie, but like most nobles, even if the battle was a complete disaster, they're not dying.
Right.
And they're probably back pretty soon.
Yeah. And you see accounts of Crusader knights even in a place where the fighting was made more intense because of the religious differences. They'll say 40 knights rode into this battle. Things were getting really, really bad, and they were starting to clearly lose. So then they rode back out. Right. Well, they don't do that without armor. Against these overwhelming odds. It's like, oh well, you know what? Let's turn around and go back because we're losing.
All right, so let's kind of dive into the history now because we're already kind of getting into it anyways. So where we left off the mini is kind of in this. It's a gray area because it's like a time of peace, but it's not really a time of peace. It's like an agreed upon peace to like, hey, we're all about to fight, but neither of us are ready right now.
Right. So
let's do a couple years of peace, and then we can like meet up and decide who's going to rule the Holy Land. And you're really seeing Baldwin IV's health deteriorate like crazy because he's come to the defense of Karak multiple times. Couple battles in the north. Edessa's fallen. That was a while ago, but like you're starting to see the noose go around the kingdom of heaven, and there's some succession worries of going on with Baldwin not being able to have any children because of his leprosy. What's that gonna look like? Guy's married Sibylla and all of those types of things, and Baldwin IV dies. He dies in 1183, I think, 1184. And so the siege of Jerusalem is in 1187. So they're in the movie, they make everything seem like it happens very, very quickly, right? But just like with most movies, they condense history.
Yeah, 1185. So right.
Okay, so he died 1185.
Yeah, so right after Saladin has completed his conquest or unifying the Muslim world, that is.
So between 1185 and 1187, there is this peace that they know is about to run out. But they still technically have this treaty. And, well, why don't you talk about, we'll talk about Guy and Reynald a little bit and kind of what's leading up to Saladin invading the Kingdom of Heaven again.
Right. So after the last major battle, Montgessard, Saladin's obviously embarrassed. It's considered like his worst defeat. Right. He's got to sort of fix that somehow. Right. And not only that, but he's probably made a lot of promises to conquering Jerusalem, getting it back in Muslim hands, and kicking out the Crusaders. So throughout, and that was in 1177.
Well, I'm gonna say one of the things that he allowed him to consolidate is his promise of taking Jerusalem again.
Right.
That they're all, okay, he's different than us. He's a Kurd, and, Egypt may be Shia, but now we're all under the Sunni rule.
Right.
But at least we're all going to take Jerusalem back.
Right. So throughout the 1180s, which is kind of this era of peace, Saladin is trying to consolidate the Muslim world, which for him means he's ended the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt. So the Shia rule is over. He's Sunni. And he is now extending up sort of northeast, wrapping around what is, think now, Israel, around the Kingdom of Jerusalem, to take what is essentially now Syria and parts of Jordan and centered around Damascus and unite those. So throughout the 1180s, as we mentioned before in the other episode, the Crusaders were always very aware of their manpower shortage compared to what if a unified Muslim state came to fight them. And so they are kind of sort of, they're trying to not poke the bear right now. And the bear is trying to get bigger and stronger and on the verge of crashing in their door.
Yet they keep poking it.
Yes, well, that brings us to a man called Reynold of Chatillon. So we mentioned him before. He's Brendan Gleeson. He's the big red-headed guy in the movie. In the movie, he's portrayed as this fanatical Knight Templar along with Guy.
Yeah.
They weren't Templars at the time. Templars were sort of a private organization. You had to give up all of your titles. All your titles and all your private possessions. You had to donate to the order.
Yeah, they could not be in the positions they are.
Right, you couldn't be a lord. Right. Now, if you moved up in the organization, you could become the Grand Master of the Templars,
which is essentially a lord.
Right? Yeah, you'd have command of the castles. But these men were not actually part of the Knights Templar. Reynold was born in France, and he married
both relatively newcomers to the Holy Land. Reynold's been there a little bit longer because he was at the battle with Baldwin IV when they beat Saladin. But generally speaking, as far as the Kingdom of Heaven's lineage and families, they're both newcomers to the Holy Land.
Right. So he comes from France. We mentioned there were some other Crusader states besides Jerusalem. You have the Principality of Antioch, and is kind of the most northern one at this point because Edessa has fallen. So he kind of messed around with the Second Crusade, which was a disaster. But he marries the heiress, or I guess the princess of Antioch. So he actually became the Prince of Antioch. So on paper, he's kind of the second-ranking Crusader lord at that time. But he was always short of money.
Well, his son is married to Isabella.
Correct. Yeah, he's married into his stepdaughter goes on to marry a Byzantine emperor. His actual daughter marries the king of Hungary. Yeah. And his stepson becomes the Prince of Antioch. I mean, he's got connections. That's why such a terrible person is able to become so influential. So he's always short of money. So he raids Cyprus, which means, and then the Byzantine emperor comes and punishes him for that. He actually imprisons and tortures the Patriarch of Antioch, which on paper is someone that's supposed to be roughly equivalent to the Pope. Right, Jerusalem had a patriarch. Right, Constantinople had a patriarch.
He's God's representative in Antioch.
Right. Well, Reynold wanted him to pay him, and he said no. So he captured and tortured one of the highest-ranking churchmen in the world. This is a Crusader lord who's supposed to be championing Christianity.
Right.
So he ends up raiding local peasants in a neighboring Muslim, one of the last independent Muslim rulers that Saladin hasn't taken over, and the guy captures Reynold. And we just mentioned how ransoming is a big thing in this world. You typically expect to get ransomed quickly. Well, the second highest ranking Crusader lord spends 15 years in prison before anyone is willing to ransom him. And they don't even know who it was. They think it was the Byzantine emperor. By then, his stepson has grown up to become the prince of it. So he heads down to Jerusalem, and through his family connections, he's made the lord of all the Crusader lands east of the Jordan.
Yep.
And this puts him in position to raid all caravans going from Egypt either up to Syria or to Mecca. He even builds a fleet that raids the Red Sea.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. He raids all the way down to the Red Sea. I mean, so his famous castle is Kerak.
Right.
And if you look on a map, Kerak is on like the eastern side of the southern edge of the Dead Sea. So you can see where, and Kerak has, and you see this in the movie, Kerak has this like invincible aura around it. It's besieged multiple times by Saladin.
Yeah, I think it's considered one of the three greatest Crusader castles.
Yes, and it's never taken until after the siege of Jerusalem, when basically there are no more Crusaders, and they go back and they take care.
Right, all the garrisons have been emptied.
Right.
Yeah.
So like having that castle in that southern Dead Sea area allows him a strategic stronghold to where he can do what you were just saying. Right. He can do all that raiding and then retreat back to Kerak, and he knows he's safe there.
Right. And the reason I mentioned the fleet, he built a fleet of 5 ships that were moved overland down to the Red Sea, which he barely touched. And this was able to raid the coast and threaten pilgrimages all the way to Mecca. And this is where Saladin sort of makes in the movie, he captures a caravan with his sister.
Yeah, which, not true.
Right, he did capture a major caravan, which triggered Saladin's invasion. Sister wasn't in it.
Right.
But it was his threatening of Mecca that made Saladin supposedly make a promise like, I will never forgive this man.
Right.
And I will get him. And so we talked about the peace, right? They have this peace at this time. Reynold, in his own way, he basically decided the peace did not apply to him. Yeah. He said all the lands he was given were essentially exempt from this peace. And so whenever he would do things and the king would ask him to stop, he'd say, I don't have to because it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah.
And so he's painted as this evil adventurer who always needed money, which is why he raided caravans.
Which he kind of was.
Yeah, he wasn't a great guy. I'll give you that. He also is somewhat portrayed as he was the only crusader leader during the 80s to be aggressive towards Saladin. And some people wonder, was he doing this purely to prevent Saladin unifying Egypt and Damascus? Because you can see when Saladin takes his army, he'll go into Syria. Reynold will conveniently invade somewhere else. And so it's like, well, was he just trying to prevent this inevitable unification?
Well,
or was he just a terrible person who wanted money?
When you read about things, and I haven't read as many books about you, but some of the little things that I've read during this, quote unquote, time of peace, like, they'll be like, oh, they were at peace, and Reynold was raiding and killing innocents and this and that, and it's like, and then they just have like an offhand sentence of like, oh, there was a Muslim raid in the north, or there was a Muslim, so it's like they were doing it too.
Right? Yeah, everyone raids.
Exactly. You can't. They always portray it, even in the movie, they portray it as the Muslims honored it 100%, and Reynold is the one who was going around causing up trouble. And although that part is true, they were also doing it.
Right.
It was not just this super perfect peace, and he's the only one doing bad things.
Right. Now, as aggressive as he was, and as much of a problem as he was for everybody, because he's sort of credited with triggering the invasion that leads to all this, he also was, at one point, the most important advisor to Baldwin, the leper. In the movie, they are not friends.
No.
They do not get along. He wants him in prison, and he almost wants an excuse to execute him.
Their relationship is much more complex in real life.
Well, in real life, as Baldwin deteriorates from his leprosy, Reynold is made his regent. I mean, all the charters that come out in the final years of his reign, Reynold is the first signature on them because he has overseen the kingdom for the leper king.
Yeah, well,
he was
Raymond's been banished.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Because he was on like the noble faction versus the court faction, and so like Raymond of Tripoli, who was kind of that for Baldwin, got basically banished because he was trying to get Isabella in to be the new king or queen, and all those kinds of things.
Right. And so
and the Eblin family is with Raymond, so they're kind of on the bad side of Guy and the court.
So yeah, he would have been a rival to the Ebelins, kind of portrayed in the movie.
Right.
He would not have just been sitting around hoping that the leper king dies because he hates him, the way they portray it in the movie. So that's Reynold. He's one of the central figures, and he'll come back again when we get to the major battle at the end.
Right.
But he's kind of credited with his aggression is what triggered this particular conflict.
Let's talk about Guy. Let's talk about Guy for a little bit, because he's an interesting figure in the sense of like he's basically nothing, and then over a very short period of time, he's the king of Jerusalem, and he's pretty unqualified when you look at him on paper to not only be king of Jerusalem, but to be leader of an army. He lacks experience on the battlefield, and when he does have experience on the battlefield, it's very hit or miss. When Reynold is like raiding and things like that, Guy goes out to do raiding too. He attacks a peaceful Muslim like caravan that are actually like informants for Baldwin IV, and just murders. Like they're keeping tabs on like the troops that come out of Egypt and stuff like that, and Guy doesn't know that, and attacks. I mean, like he's just one blunder after another.
Right. He's from the Lusignan family, which is a major family in France. They
technically under English rule.
Right. It's a part of France, that Richard Lionheart, Henry II.
Henry II at this point.
Yeah, Richard Lionheart would have control of. So he owed allegiance for French lands to the kings of England. Shows up in the Holy Land. To your point, they don't even know when he got there, so he wasn't all that important. I don't even think
he's essentially a Frankish knight,
right? Who shows up. He's married off to Sibylla, I believe, by Baldwin IV to avoid a major political incident.
Right. So that's when Raymond and the Ebelins
are making a play.
They're making a play at a certain point, and so he does it as a quick play to basically solidify his succession line,
right?
And then that's when Raymond basically gets banished.
Right. Because he wants Sibylla's son, who's not by Guy, right?
No, it's by William of Montafon.
Okay, yeah, so by a previous...
Who died,
previous husband. Baldwin wants her nephew, which again, if you watch the extended edition, you'll see more of that. I don't even think I don't even know if he's a character in the regular edition, but Baldwin wants his nephew to become king, and to solidify that, he marries her off to Guy, who again, we call him not that important, still from a major family, still brings some strength and support.
For sure.
And Reynold, again, Reynolds everywhere. Reynold is part of that group because the long time he spent in prison, he was in prison with Sibylla's uncle. So, they had a lot of time to bond, 15 years in a dungeon. And so he's part of this camp, and he supports Sibylla and Guy as well. Which, again, on paper, the movie makes it look like he's this troublesome guy who lives in the desert. He's about as high as it gets before the king. And so having Reynolds' support is almost bigger than Guy's at this point.
Yeah.
And he supports Guy, so together they're able to.
So we're kind of coming to the Baldwin IV dies. Baldwin V is crowned king, and he has Raymond's brought back in as his regent, but then he rules less than a year. Baldwin V.
Right. Yeah.
We don't
know what he died.
We don't know what he died of. I've dug around to even they don't even say he may have had leprosy.
They just say a year later.
Unknown causes. He dies.
Right.
And he's 8 or 9 or something. And he's really, really young. So it was going to be a while before he was actually king on his own anyways.
Right.
But regardless, he dies. And the very next thing that happens is that Sibylla basically crowns Guy king, and lines are drawn within the kingdom against this, and obviously lines are drawn outside the kingdom because Saladin's on the move again.
Right. Which means, talking about things the movie got wrong, in the extended edition, she poisons her own young son because he has leprosy, and in her mind, the worst thing that can happen is he'll grow old like her brother did and rot and deteriorate, and she doesn't want to see that. That means we really don't have any evidence.
Yeah, that's all made up. That's all made up.
Yeah.
Right. So we're getting kind of we can talk about the movie here a little bit too, because basically the movie, all of the Balian's adventures before we get to his time in Jerusalem is all made up.
Right.
Balian, like we said in the mini, he is one of the noble families of Jerusalem, and they have been there for generations.
Right, since the First Crusade.
Yeah.
It's interesting to show sort of. I do think it gives a good perspective of why you might leave Europe, because at the beginning of the movie, he's at a loss, right? His wife has committed suicide because she had a miscarriage.
Right.
And so he thinks she is essentially in hell.
Yeah. He goes to redeem her through his actions in the Holy Land.
Right, which gives you a great insight why not everyone who went to the Holy Land was doing it for personal, salvation. Mm-hmm. A lot of people were adventurers, but there were a lot of people drawn to it because they thought, maybe, the church is telling me if I go do this, my sins can be forgiven. Maybe I can get someone out of purgatory or out of hell.
And make some money and change my status.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they show that with Liam Neeson's character. He's the second son of a baron in France.
Right.
So
also not true.
Well, yeah, exactly. But he did go to the Holy Land.
And now he's the Baron of Evil.
Right, exactly. And so that's why Balian in the movie originally goes, that's not true. It might have been true for a lot of other Europeans.
Right.
And I also think it's neat that they specifically point out that they make their way to southern Italy on the sailing route as opposed to the overland route through Hungary and Byzantine lands. So that's kind of a neat... one thing I guess you could poke at is knights did not just ride around in armor on their war horses.
Yeah, just all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
They would have worn... Clothes, wool, maybe tights, and then if they could afford
some type of gambeson or something.
Right, and they would have ridden around on a common horse or even a pony.
Yeah, the war horses think of a war horse more like a tank.
Right.
Like army soldiers don't just drive around in a tank.
Right.
That is a war machine.
Right.
Used only for war.
Right.
And taken care of in that manner.
Yes, and there were some general purpose horses that could be used for both. And this is kind of more in the later medieval period, but some of the most expensive war horses, for comparison, it would be the equivalent of buying an expensive house nowadays. Well, you're not just going to wear that thing out.
You're not going to wear your house out?
No, exactly. It's like you try not to beat your house up. You're going to ride the cheap little pony or even a mule.
Which a lot of them did.
Right.
A lot of them rode ponies.
Right. You'd find a pony, and if you were really lucky, you'd get one of those funky ponies from Norway that had a special trot that was considered more comfortable to ride on. You didn't just wear out your destrier.
A lot of times when you read books, they'll have like a prancer, right? Which is one of those horses that it's bigger than a pony, but it's a comfy ride.
Right, and it almost it would look silly for Hollywood to have a lord wearing tights on a pony doing a little prance, which is why they don't do it.
Right,
but that's actually probably more accurate. Then you don't ride around with your helmet on.
No.
I mean, in the Army, we hated wearing our
helmets. Any excuse to take the helmet off.
Exactly. Or your plates. That's wearing plates in training. It was man, when are we allowed take plates off. This isn't very comfortable.
Anytime you're allowed to do training without your plates, and you're like, heck yeah,
exactly. And I know humans are different now than they were, but we aren't that different. I mean, I'm not wearing my armor for fun. Especially since there's no AC, so you're probably outside. It's either really cold or you're headed to the desert.
Yep.
Both not fun for wearing metal armor.
No.
So. Nope. But anyways, that story-wise, none of that necessarily happened to Balian.
Right. But when we get to now, I mean, we're at the end of the piece, right? So Saladin's consolidated. He's coming. Guy is the king, and Saladin invades, Christian-held lands, and he's going to besiege Tyre, and that is what brings the Kingdom of Jerusalem's army out into the field. So Saladin is besieging another Crusader stronghold, and it's actually not going that well for Saladin, but it's his goal to draw them out. That's the whole point of the siege, is to draw them out, and it works. Once they know that Guy and the Kingdom of Jerusalem's army is on the move, they drop the siege and they move in. And so when you look at where their armies are, if you look on a map, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the army of Jerusalem goes to Acre, which is kind of north of Jerusalem along the coast. And they are going to attack a city called Tiberias, which is right on the coast of the Sea of Galilee. That's their goal, to penetrate in there, help relieve the siege, and destroy Saladin's force, because he has consolidated all of the different caliphates and different Muslim lords and brought them. It said it's his largest army that he's ever assembled, is to reconquer these lands for the Ayyubid dynasty.
Yeah.
And so the Kingdom of Jerusalem army is moving east towards the Sea of Galilee, and pretty much as soon as they leave Acre, they are harassed by Muslim horse archers the entire way. And this is going back to the armor thing, like, they're not losing a bunch of guys.
Right.
It's harassment. Like, they're not really, I mean, I'm not saying that no one died.
Right.
But they still have a combat effective army where they're getting to. So
right. They are losing horses,
yeah,
which is a big deal. But yeah, the armor, you see accounts when Crusader armies march of, like, men almost look like porcupines because the arrows sticking in their mail, right? Again, Hollywood makes us think if you hit a guy, he goes down. It's like an off button.
Well, I was going to say, arrows are not sniper bullets.
Right. and there's also becoming more and more tests where, the beautiful, where they shoot the arrow high in the air and it arches down and falls on someone and they're just dead instantly.
It's made up.
Right, exactly. Archery's got to be almost a direct fire or near direct fire weapon where you're shooting it straight at a guy, or it's not going to get through his armor.
And they're also finding out that the big volley fire where everyone yells loose and there's is also pretty much made up.
Right, probably never happened.
It's almost all independent fire.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it was not this is another Braveheart trope. Like, they did not just line up and then you stand at attention while you do a few volley fires at each other to break up the troops. Like, that's almost, I mean, they're pretty sure it just never happened like that.
Exactly. And especially wouldn't be happening with Turkish-based horse archers who are riding around. They're not riding in a line
yelling loose.
Where it's the American Revolution, but on horseback. They're just riding around harassing people, trying to pick off horses, or trying to get chunks of the column to separate from each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And we see this march in the film, right? They're not getting harassed, but they do make a point of saying, like, the Crusaders have to move from water to water, and they're not as mobile because they don't have the light horse capabilities that Saladin's forces do. They're heavy infantry, some light infantry, and then heavy cavalry.
Yes.
That is what they are. And so they're moving towards the Sea of Galilee, and they realize, okay, Saladin's forces are here somewhere. We're being harassed. We know the army's here. These guys this isn't a raid.
Right.
And so they're realizing that they're going to have to make camp somewhere, and they're going to have a position. And so they go towards the spring, and they're traveling in the summer. And I mean, the battle takes place in July.
Yeah.
And
July in Israel.
Yeah, it's unbelievably hot. They drink the springs dry, and it's not enough. It's not enough. And so, like,
think about how many horses are getting water from it. how many men were in the Crusader army?
Yeah, you're looking somewhere between like 20 and 28,000 men,
Right.
give or take,
plus
all the
single
horses.
largest Crusader force that ever took the field.
Right.
Because they emptied all their garrisons.
They have no forces anywhere else.
Right. They essentially, everything is a skeleton force at best because they're all in this army.
Right.
Yeah.
And the movie does do a good job of portraying the hotness, the dryness, the dustiness, because like there's Randall has a flagon of water, and he like dumps it on his arm,
Right.
Yeah,
think when you've picked up a piece of metal that's left out in the sun.
Yeah.
Now wear that all over your body. It's hot. I mean, you could literally, if you turn your head the wrong way, you might burn your neck.
Yes.
I mean, it's.
Yep. So then they realize they have to get to another spring. So there's another spring near the Horns of Hattin. And so they have to veer kind of northeast from where they're actually going. Well, Saladin sees this because he didn't expect them to. He thought they were going to go straight towards Tiberias. And he positions himself in between the Crusader army and the Sea of Galilee, which the Sea of Galilee is fresh water. So it's called the Sea. The Sea of Galilee is actually not that big, but it's
a big old lake basically.
Yeah, it's a big lake, but it's one of the few solid sources of fresh water in other than the Jordan River. But that's in this desert that is Israel, and so he knows that that's where they're going now. He positions himself in between these hills, which is not actually the Horns. The Horns are kind of off to the side, but the Horns of Hattin are called the Horns of Hattin because it's two hills together that when you look at it, it kind of looks like horns. That's why it's called the Horns of Hattin. And the Crusaders camp, and they're going to try and break the Muslim lines in the morning, basically to get water. They're dying of thirst. This is no longer a conquering, let's go get the castle. This is, hey, if we don't get water tomorrow, we basically die.
Yeah, we die of thirst out here.
And all throughout the night, I mean, we're really centering on the Battle of the Horns of Hattin now. And all through the night, they have no more water, or very, very little at best. And the Muslim forces are banging drums, and they're singing prayers, and they're trying to keep them awake. All the kind of
probably firing some arrows here and there.
They're harassing them constantly. And then the morning comes, and the Crusaders are starting to pack up and get ready. And because it's summer, everything is so unbelievably dry. They set fire to the area around the Crusaders, so they're inhaling smoke.
The Muslims set fire.
Saladin's forces set fire to the surrounding area, and so that they're breathing in smoke, and they're already dry throats and everything like that. And the movie, I mean, movies always choose what battles to show and what battles to not. And I always, a lot of the time, wish they would have shown the Horns of Hattin's a really cool battle.
Right, and they do just skip it basically.
They skip it completely. One thing that the movie does get wrong is that Bailey and Raymond are at the battle. They fight in the battle.
Yes. Yep.
And so the movie makes you portray it as it's just they all get surrounded and they're just wiped out in 5 minutes. They make it seem like it's the Battle of Little Bighorn, but the Crusades.
Right.
The Crusaders are on this little hill and they're surrounded, and then the mobile horse archers run out, and then they're also all dead. From what I can read, it's a pretty hard fought battle.
It is, yeah. It's very tough, especially clearing off the final Crusaders on the hills.
Yes, I mean from what I've read, there are multiple times the Muslims actually think that Saladin's forces they're just going to wipe them out.
Yeah,
and multiple times. So Raymond, and they all fight together. They're losing, but it's tough because
the Tiberius character of the movie,
who
would be Raymond.
Exactly, yeah. So the Tiberius character in the movie, who is actually named Raymond, he realizes that they are going to lose this battle. So he gets all of his mounted knights together, and they break through the Muslim lines. They get to the Sea of Galilee, they get some water, and then they take off back towards Tripoli, which is where Raymond is from. He's one of the...
Is he the count?
He's the count.
He's the count. It's one of those Crusader states, and he's the ruler.
Yes, he's the count of Tripoli, right? So he doesn't like Guy anyways, and so he basically, I wouldn't say betray, but cuts his losses.
Right. It's we got to get out if we can.
Right.
Yep.
And
again, you see that armor. It's some of the reason they're going so slow is they've got these infantry with them, or they've lost a lot of horses on the march. Which is why you see, the movie, even though Reynolds wasn't a Templar, they paint the Templars as ultra aggressive, and the Hospitallers and the black with the white as not.
Right.
Really, they were both very aggressive knightly orders. And through a lot of the march, they're if we want to charge, we got to do it now. because we're losing horses.
Right.
And so they're always pushing for the charge. But when they finally do, even if they can't win the battle, you still see these heavy knights. Again, another thing Hollywood has tricked us into thinking is that knights were big dumb brutes with armor that doesn't work and who didn't know how to fight. No, when they were ready to go, they cut a group of them cut their way out and got out.
Yeah, exactly. They busted through the lines.
Maybe they couldn't catch those horse archers and get them all, but they were like, we got to get out of here,
Yeah.
or we're going to die. And they did it. They cut their way out.
I was reading. This is a quote from Saladin's son about the battle. They're kind of like up on the hill, you know, managing and putting in reinforcements and telling them to try different things as generals do on the battlefield, and they're surrounded multiple times, and the Frankish charge pushes them back over and over and over again. And Saladin's son is quoted as saying like, that they pushed us all. They pushed the Muslims almost back to their position. They almost broke through and got to Saladin,
right?
But they just didn't have enough strength to carry it, and so they would get pushed back to kind of like their camp again,
right?
And Saladin's son's question like, "We've won!" And as soon as he would say that, the Franks would rally again and do another charge and push them and almost break through. And he kind of had this like, it may be anecdotal,
right?
But apparently like Saladin like looked at him and was like, "We have not won until the flag of Guy of Lysion has fallen."
Really poetic response.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's a primary account. It's cool to see that.
And it reflects what we mentioned in the other episode, where when you read Muslim accounts of the Crusades, there's not a lot about European culture they're impressed with at this time because they're pretty much more advanced at everything.
Yes.
The only thing that impressed them was knights in battle. You know, they're like, Europeans are dirty. They don't practice hygiene. They don't know how to tax. They don't know how to govern. Their science, they don't do science.
Right.
You know, like we are so much better than them at everything. But when they strap on their armor,
and get
when these
horse,
big dudes with big armor, you know, when they get on a horse, it's pretty darn hard to stop them.
Yes. So now we can jump back into the movie real quick because this is a fake battle. But when Orlando Bloom's Eblin force shows up at Carrack, which like that scene after that battle is actually pretty true.
Right.
When Jerusalem arrives and everything like that.
To relieve the castle.
But that cavalry battle, which I love this scene.
Right. It's great. It's awesome.
It's awesome. It's probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie. But I mean 50-50 maybe, right? Depending on how many light horse archers and things like that are there. But it would not be inconceivable for that many Frankish knights to just blow through them.
Yes. I mean, I think one time we even paused it and counted it. He's got, give or take, 30 to 40 men at arms.
And there may be 200, light,
300
light horses.
There would be times where 300 would be enough to surround him and get him. There'd be other times where 40 knights would cut through that, make them,
and they would probably retreat.
Yeah, chase them off. Because horse archers, it's not even trying to belittle them. They don't want to be in a fight like that.
They're not meant to engage. They don't. Right. And they don't fight that way.
Yeah, they are cavalry. Eventually,
so in the movie,
a charge may be what ends the battle, but they're not looking to just go head to head with knights.
I mean, in the movie, they're not really horse archers. They're light cavalry with spears.
There aren't any horse archers.
So that would raise, in my opinion, the number even higher to the success of the Crusaders.
Oh yeah, the Crusades. The idea of and as a quick anecdote, they would have used the term Saracen at the time. Yeah, Muslim and Islam were not words the Europeans used until like the 15th, 16th century.
You might hear the word heathen.
Yeah, you might. But they would have referred to Middle Eastern Muslims as Saracens and the ones in Spain as Moors. But anyways,
they always called the ones from Egypt the Egyptians.
They always call them Egyptians. Yeah,
which they are, but not. Not the way like Cleopatra Egyptian.
Exactly.
Well,
they just happen to be.
She's not Egyptian either. But.
Right. And they might refer to Turks as Turks. But if you're talking Arab, or I guess these are kind of Turkish, but if you're talking...
they're Saracens.
Yeah, they're going to call these Muslims, they're going to refer to them as Saracens. Yeah, the idea of them trying to charge them head on, they would have liked that. They would have like, okay, we're in our element. Mm-hmm. We can get to them now.
I would say, like 50-50, 60-40, those 40 knights would win that battle.
Right, yeah, they might. Or at least they might have a draw and then go back.
Yeah, exactly. I was like,
the movie makes it look like they get scooped up pretty.
There's a reason that the Frankish charge was such a big deal. It's because it worked. Mm-hmm. And it worked time and time again. And it saved the Crusaders all the time.
It's half the plot of Braveheart. Is that those peasants from Scotland, and they didn't really do it this way, but they said they find a way to stop a charge. Right. So, yeah, and in the movie, as great as that scene is, they all get like knocked off their horses and arrested, basically. Yeah, pretty quickly. Still a cool scene.
But yeah, so now we'll go back to the horns of Atene. They basically are exhausted. I mean, not to belittle Saladin's like generalship, because he is a good general and he is smart. And obviously, you see his generalship really up to the battle. That's what really makes him a good general, is how he positions and how he maneuvers.
He sets the scene.
He sets the scene. And the farther and farther back you go, that's really what wins the battle for you. Like when you talk about Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great and stuff like that, it's the pre-battle stuff that wins the battle.
Right.
And
Sun Tzu's got a quote about that, I think.
I'm sure. Sun Tzu's so broad.
Well, he's got quotes about everything. But yeah, so, the battle's won,
before the battle.
Yeah, before the battle.
Yeah,
a horrible paraphrasing right there, but that's the gist of it.
Sorry, son.
Yeah.
But by the end, the Crusader army is almost annihilated.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, Raymond and his knights break out and they're free.
It's about the only notable part of the army that gets away.
Balian basically fights a rear guard action back to these springs with the survivors. It's like 200. Like 200 men. So, not that the rest of them all die.
Out of how many? 20,000?
Yeah, 25, 28,000
right.
guys. The roughly 200 are not casualties in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
And Balian leads this rear guard back to where they go back to Tyr, I think.
Right.
And
in most pitched battles, if you lose a third of your force, that falls in the category of disaster.
Yes.
And this is the category of massacre.
Yeah,
I mean, this is once they break, once it's over, it's a massacre.
So they're so thirsty and exhausted. There's counts of them. Excuse me. There's counts of some of the Crusaders that they climb up to the horns of Fatim to basically do like a last stand on the high ground. After they're like done fighting, they basically are asking the Muslims like, "Kill me, please." Like they're wounded. They can't breathe because they're so like they are literally dying of thirst in the battle. They're withering away, and there's counts of them asking like, "Please, mercy, kill me."
Yeah.
And a ton of, so like I said, like 200 make it out. Not all of them die. There are thousands and thousands of them that are captured, including Guy and Reynaud. But most of them are sold into slavery. And after the battle, apparently there was such an influx of slaves within the Ayyubid Caliphate that like some of these crusaders were like bought at auction for like the price of a sandal. I mean, that's how many like
flooded the market.
Flooded the market with crusader slaves.
Yeah,
and most of them were they're slaves, but most of them were well treated. Every single Templar and every single Hospitaller that was caught, they were all beheaded because they're seen as radicals.
Right, they're the radical, aggressive. I mean, a lot of these raids that Reynold was launching, there's a very good chance he may have had some of these knights with it.
For sure.
Because these guys are...
Well, they always requested contingents from both of the orders.
These are orders based in Europe that answered to the Pope in theory. And so they probably have a more likelihood that they've cycled in Europeans. And new Europeans almost were always more aggressive than Franks that had grown up in the Middle East. Absolutely. Because they're born into the world, whereas the ones coming from Europe are much more of that adventure-minded.
And they're getting papal propaganda about heathen Muslim Saracens.
They grew up on stories of Granddad in the First Crusade, who marched across Europe and didn't negotiate, just conquered, and they get there and the scene has totally changed, but they don't want to hear that. They want to conquer and fight. They're on crusade. Right. They're not just living there.
Some of those orders did survive. We know that, but a massive amount of them are, and this is kind of stereotypical for these orders because they don't retreat, right? And they're always like the shock troops, and they're always wanting to charge, and they're always fighting.
It's the Spartans, right? It's the Spartans of the Knights.
Yes,
right.
Yes,
it's kind of
their turnover rate is ridiculous because they are always dying. Right. Now, they win a lot of battles too and turn the tides, but like if the battle goes bad for them, they lose heavy casualties because they don't retreat and they fight hard and they know they're going to be beheaded.
They're in the vanguard.
Yeah, all of that.
In fact, they also did notoriously not always get along with each other. I believe it's one of the first sieges of Ascalon before the Crusaders took the city. A group of 40 Templars, there was a breach in the wall. They were the first ones in, and they wanted to be the ones that like won the battle. So while one group continued attacking, one group stood and blocked the breach and wouldn't let the rest of the Crusader army into the city. So surprise, the ones in the city got rounded up and killed, and the Crusader army had to like fall back and try again. Like, could you imagine at D-Day? Like,
Right.
Hey, postmen on the beach, so no
the-
more
the-
Americans.
Yeah,
can
the Ranger battalion's not letting the
the first infantry division. Yeah. You're like, what? Like, are you? That's insane. That is an insane thought. But to them, it was like, oh yeah, this is our breach. We got this city. No, man. But so they were difficult. They were aggressive, and yeah, good chance they'd be beheaded.
Side note, like a couple weeks before the Battle of Hattin, there was another major battle where it was just Templars and Hospitallers versus Saladin's army, and they got wiped out again. They got surrounded. There just weren't enough of them. I mean, there's not a whole lot on the battle, and I'm sorry I can't remember like the name of it, but they're like hugely outnumbered.
Yeah,
and so they're already hurting for numbers. Like the orders basically have to be reconstructed after
when they get wiped out.
When they get wiped out,
yeah.
So now let's talk about the end of the battle and really about Guy and Renaud and,
Right.
and Saladin.
And this brings up a couple instances from the movie that are so two things that we see Guy and Renaud. One is, what was the we know Saladin wanted to conquer Kingdom of Jerusalem. What was it that like actually triggered or gave him the excuse or the casus belli, whatever they call it? What gave him his excuse to invade? Renaud captured an exceptionally large caravan. And in the movie, it's the scene where it's portrayed as he got the sister of Saladin.
Yeah, he kills the sister.
We know that's not true because she actually returned from Mecca on a different caravan, and Saladin made sure she got back to Egypt.
But that myth was going around.
It did, yes. It was thought for a long time he had got her sister. So in the movie, Saladin sends some envoys and says, return this
the body,
and behead Renaud and send us his head.
Right.
I don't know if he asked for Renaud's head, but he actually asked for basically payment because in this caravan it was money he lost, not his sister. And Guy agrees to it. Whereas in the movie, Guy stabs him in the throat. Yeah, no, Guy agrees to it, and again Renaud is like, no, that doesn't apply to me. So, and that's when Saladin calls jihad. Yeah. Goes to Tyre to start. All right, so now we jump back to the end of the battle. In the movie, there's the scene where Saladin scoops a cup of ice, hands it to Guy. Guy refuses to drink it and hands it to Renaud, who drinks it. Saladin gets mad. He says, I didn't offer the cup to you.
Right.
And then he cuts his throat and then goes outside in the extended division and beheads him.
Right.
This is very close to what actually happened in real life. Saladin offers Guy a cup of iced rose water, which, in addition, is two things. One, it's kind of the, hey, I've given you food and water. You now know I'm not going to kill you. That was like a thing back then, kind of like in Game of Thrones. Like, hey, you've had food in my tent. You may be my prisoner, but I'm going to treat you well. He also famously makes a comment to Guy that a king does not kill a king.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
He supposedly really did say that.
Well, and it's also like, you're in the desert, and I am providing ice for you.
Right.
I can provide for
that
you.
means someone in my realm went to the top of a mountain and brought it down just for this.
Right.
Like, I have that ability.
It's a power. It's a power.
Right.
Move.
And in real life, Guy drank from the cup, then handed it to Renaud. And so,
one thing I read is that Guy, going back to him not knowing what he's doing, had no idea what this even means.
right. He probably said thanks.
Yeah.
He's like, oh man, I was really thirsty. I appreciate that. So he hands it to Guy, who drinks from it, and so hands it to Renaud. And so supposedly Saladin, this is the account. Some people are not sure, but Saladin took Renaud into another tent, began throwing all these accusations. You're a brigand, you're a thief, you're a murderer, you did this, you did that. And then struck him with his sword. And as he fell to the ground, Saladin then beheads him again, or like hits him again and cuts his head off. And some chronicles, the Muslim chronicles will say like, oh, well, he didn't give him water, Guy gave him the water. And so that's why it was okay. But regardless, the man that he had sworn he would never forgive.
Right. Well, they say that Saladin says, I did not give that to you because Guy has no idea what it means.
Right.
He thinks he's just being offered water and ice.
Exactly.
And so he gives it to his that's why Saladin's like, no, this is not how this works.
Yeah, this is a serious
This is a thing.
Yeah, this is not... I'm not handing out orange slices and Capri Suns,
right? Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
It's not halftime at the soccer game.
Right. And so takes him another tent, argues with him, hits him with his sword, and then beheads him himself personally. Guy, however, treated pretty well for the most part.
Yeah. Well, that's when he says a king does not kill a king.
He says a king does not kill a king, which supposedly he really did say. So with the exception of Guy being the jerk who refuses the water, that scene's pretty accurate. And I think it's cool that they put that in.
I do as well. This movie, when it was being made, apparently like the Muslim propaganda machine or whatever got wind of it, and so they were all like out in arms about like how they're going to be portrayed, and they were just bashing on it and everything like that. And then when it came out, they all like loved it because Saladin's
right. He's portrayed
pretty accurately. He's and I mean, I'm not saying that he shouldn't have been. I'm just saying it's like he's portrayed pretty nobly,
right?
As are his subordinate commanders, like the fake, Balian's guy that he captures in the desert with the horse. Yeah, he's based on a couple guys, but he himself actually never has a name in the movie, but he's a pretty honorable man as well. You know, what's his thing about here? Reputation preceding you. Your name will be known by your enemies before you even realize it.
Good quality. Good quality will be known amongst your enemies if you ever meet them.
Yeah.
No, it's an accurate portrayal. I mean, I can't really think of too many instances where Saladin, I can't think of any off the top of my head, where he's portrayed as a violent or harsh man. I mean, it was harsh times. It's a medieval world and it's the Crusades.
And he cuts Reynald's head off.
Right.
But like even that in of itself is not seen as like overly evil.
Right. No, and I think he and his men, they would have seen that probably. I mean, we're kind of projecting here. We don't know, but Reynald was blatantly breaking peace treaties because he just decided they didn't apply to him. I think that would have been seen as like, we just beheaded essentially a brigand who was breaking laws, I mean, not even just ours, his own king's laws, right? So,
because there was always a healthy respect between Saladin and Baldwin.
Yes. Yeah. And they put that in the movie too, when Guy is standing there realizing like how horrible of a king he was and how he just has basically sacrificed the entire kingdom of Jerusalem because of his own pride. And I don't know if Saladin said this, but he said, "Were you not once close to a great king to learn from his example?" And the whole movie, Guy hates the Leper King, right? Hates Baldwin, and it's like, holy smokes! Like I had command of this thing for like an hour, and I ruined it. So,
it's like giving like a teenage kid the keys to your Ferrari,
right?
And then wondering why it's wrecked.
Yeah, and backs it into a tree as he's leaving the driveway, basically. So so that's kind of Hattin is now the fiasco of Hattin has happened.
Yeah, I mean it, and like we said, like there's no more forces in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Now, obviously, Antioch and Tripoli still have forces, but they are not just buddy-buddy all the time.
Right. They don't just, you need my man? Okay.
Yeah, I mean there's some accounts that the king of Tripoli, or the Count of Tripoli, which is Raymond, had like a deal with Saladin that was like, hey, you can come in from the north, I'll let you conquer the Kingdom of Jerusalem, and I'll just be your regent.
Right.
In Kingdom, I mean, like, I don't know if that's like proven or not proven, but like I would not doubt that.
I wouldn't doubt it either. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him.
No, and Raymond was at the battle too, so it's like it's all weird,
It's a feudal era, you know, that no one is as devoted to the nation state as they are to their personal holdings.
Yes,
and so
100%.
I mean, maybe Reynolds, as much as we bash him, but no one else is like, if your options are die a martyr or keep your dukedom, it's like, what, I'll take the dukedom.
Right. Well,
it pays pretty well.
And so, like, everyone views, like, the Crusaders came and they conquered the land that wasn't theirs. And it's like, okay, that happens all the time. And these Crusader states have been there for over 150 years now. Like,
they're born and raised
there. They are not, like, even, like, Saladin's, yes, he views it as our land and wants it back. But he views them as actual states. He is viewing them as a political entity that he is trying to conquer.
Yeah, get rid of.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's not just like there's like thieves wandering the area that he has to round up. He is attacking kingdoms. He views them as kingdoms. He views Baldwin as the king of Jerusalem, right? So, anyway, really, like after the Horns of Hattin, there are no more viable forces in the kingdom of Jerusalem. They're all gone. And Saladin proceeds to he takes Acre, he takes Jaffa, he takes Beirut, he takes a whole bunch of other Crusader states, and then he goes back to besiege
Jerusalem.
Well, no, Tyre. Or Tyre.
Tyre, yeah.
Excuse me, I keep on saying Tyre. I always like don't want to say the word that sounds like a tire on your car, but so I'm like, it must be Tyre because it can't be Tyre. Anyway, that's just when I was young reading it, and it still just comes out. Anyways, he goes back to besiege Tyre, and that's where a lot of refugees went, and that's where Balian is. Balian's at Tyre, and he asked personal permission from Saladin to go to Jerusalem because he knows that's where he's headed.
Right.
That's
the prize.
The prize is Jerusalem. So in the movie, Balin's unmarried and he has a love affair with Sibylla. But in real life, he's married and has children. And they're in Jerusalem. So he asked personal permission from Saladin to go to Jerusalem to get his family out and basically take them out of the kingdom of Jerusalem.
Right, his wife and kids.
His wife and kids. And Saladin says, yes, I will allow you, because the Ibn family is well respected in all of this area by Muslim and, Crusader kingdom alike. Even if they don't agree with them, they're a well respected family. And so he grants him permission as long as he doesn't take up arms against him whenever he goes there. Well, Balian arrives at Jerusalem. There's something like 14 knights in Jerusalem and 150 men-at-arms or something like that.
Right.
And the bishop of Jerusalem, I think his name is Heracles, begs
something like that.
Begs Balian to stay and absolves him of his oath to Saladin because Saladin's a Muslim.
Oh, thanks.
And he says, now if you defend Jerusalem, you earn
guaranteed heaven.
Guaranteed heaven, and you basically, because you're doing it for God, it nullifies your oath as a man to another man, because now Jerusalem's God's city and all of that kind of
how convenient.
Yeah, yes, yeah. Well, either way, Balian stays.
Yeah.
He does stay. And so we'll talk about the movie and history at the same time. So there's 14 knights in Jerusalem left. He makes 60 new knights.
So kind of like in the movie.
So for the things I've read, it's not like that, but in the movie, it's a scene.
Right.
It's like does making a man a knight make him a better fighter?
Yeah.
And then pause for dramatic effect. Orlando Bloom break the fourth wall in the camera. And he's just like, yes.
When some of the people sprinkled throughout are random commoners he's bumped into.
Yeah.
One of them is the guy that was burying his wife at the very beginning as a peasant in France.
It's a side plot. That he comes down there too to get
and they all give the patriarch this dirty look.
We showed him.
Yeah, exactly. We're knights now. How dare you think that we aren't? Yeah. Pretty dramatic, but it is cool that he really did do a mass knighting.
Yes, he did. And I mean, you do that for multiple reasons, right? Morale being one of them.
Yeah. And it could be. It's not necessarily 60 peasants became knights.
No.
We've said the term men-at-arms for a long time.
Right.
A knight is someone who's been knighted. A man-at-arms is someone who fights as an armored heavy horseman with a lance.
Who just is not nobility.
Well, yeah, and so all knights at this time were men-at-arms.
Right. So
not all men-at-arms had been knighted.
Right. So you're also looking at sergeants as well.
Right, yeah.
You could have a sergeant that has the exact same capabilities that a knight does. He is just not a knight.
Right. No one has actually knighted him.
Right.
Squires had not been knighted. Like you said, sergeants, there's that rare professional soldier at the time. Mercenaries.
That's where he got the new knights from. He didn't just there's a potter and there's a bread.
Yeah, like in this movie.
Yeah.
I'm a potter, sir.
Yeah,
okay, well, not you. So, all knights were men-at-arms. Not all men-at-arms had been knighted. Right. Those were heavily armored horsemen is what that meant.
So now we get to the Siege of Jerusalem, which is the climax of the film. And I mean, obviously, it's the climax of the campaign as well. It is the granddaddy prize of them all. And we talked about this in the mini, that Jerusalem is not a strategic city at all. It actually hinders your ability because you have to defend it. You have to garrison it.
It's quite large.
It's huge, especially as a medieval. And it's a huge city.
It's awkwardly placed almost because it's not a mountain. It's not on the coast. You can't get to it with ships.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of on a hill, but also not. It's hard to defend.
It's hard to defend. It's also hard. It's just hard enough to attack, though, that you can't run over and grab it.
Right.
Richard the Lionheart would famously try 3 times, and all 3 times he gets there, he's like, "Nah, we're not. Let's leave. We're not doing this."
Right.
And all 3 times Saladin said, "Oh my goodness, if he comes, he's going to take it, no problem." It's just this. It's this awkward.
Well, Saladin, even I think now I'm trying to remember, but it's something along the lines of that he at a war council brought up hey, what if we don't take Jerusalem and we go and we conquer all the other places and then Jerusalem just falls to us because we own everything else?
Right.
And they were like, you promised.
Telling your kids, what if we do ice cream tomorrow?
Right.
And they're like, you said ice cream today.
Yes. Yeah. Pretty much. And the promise is Jerusalem by force.
Yeah. And
going back to what we talked about before, it's Jerusalem by force because of the siege in 1099.
Right.
And none of the people right now were alive then, obviously.
almost 100 years ago.
But they were like, no, They took it by force and killed a bunch of our people in there.
Yeah.
We are taking this by force, and we are killing Crusaders in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Like, killing Crusaders is good, but killing Crusaders in Jerusalem, it's like, why we are here.
Right. Yeah. This is the revenge moment for the sometimes estimated 70,000 Muslims and Jewish inhabitants that were massacred roughly 100 years earlier when the Crusaders took
Right.
it.
And so he's forced to. He is forced to go and besiege Jerusalem. He arrives there in the 20th of September. In the movie, when Balian is there and Tiberius leaves, like Tiberius flees, the Raymond character.
And Raymond never really came to Jerusalem, right? He wouldn't have been there with Balian.
I don't remember. I don't remember if he's there or not. I don't think he is because he's in Tripoli.
Right. That's why I assume he's in his own county that he rules.
I can't remember this. Anyways, I think it's Balian and the bishop, and there's like one other lord that are real like figures, and obviously Sibylla, who is she's the queen of the kingdom of Jerusalem.
She's now the queen.
And so they are preparing their defenses. In the movie, it makes it seem like Saladin gets there in like 3 days, right? But the Battle of Hattin was in July, and then he goes to besiege Tyre, and then he arrives in September at Jerusalem. Siege of Jerusalem goes from the 20th of September to the 2nd of August. So even that in of itself is not a super, super long siege. We'll talk about why in a second. But in the movie, it makes it seem like it's like 2 days long. Like, the movie condenses everything.
Yeah. I think he probably would have been... I think Raymond would have been at Tyre, because in the list of cities that Saladin captured, he tried to take Tyre. It's the only one that held out on his way to Jerusalem. So, I know he's probably there defending his home capital.
Right. But this is the part of the movie of Kingdom of Heaven where I believe, other than the condensing of time, they get it pretty darn right. Mm-hmm. The Siege of Jerusalem in the movie is... I think it's an amazing scene.
Oh, it's an awesome battle sequence.
Yes.
The scale, the shots.
Now, they do get a few little things wrong. We'll talk about that in a second. But like as far as what takes place, how it takes place, and what they do in the fighting, it's pretty much what we can see in the historical records as far as the battle takes place. They start besieging at 2 different points, and I was looking them up. It says the Tower of David and the Damascus Gate, which are the 2 famous kind of entrances of Jerusalem at this time. And there are very few actual fighting men in Jerusalem. Now, that doesn't mean that the rest of the population's not doing anything. Now, a lot of them aren't. A lot of them aren't. They're all in hiding.
Oh, sure, yeah. Oh, hiding. Oh, you mean they're not helping?
They're not helping. A lot of them are not helping, but a lot of them are. They're bringing arrows. They're bringing water. Like they are, and they're also fighting. But they can't break through. Like there's they try and put up siege towers on the walls like 2 or 3 different times, and they beat them back. They set fire to them. They knock them down. They've got all the anti-siege equipment and their mandibles and all this stuff like that. But Saladin brought all that stuff too. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I didn't like about the siege is how the Saladin's trebuchets fire in the movie. They are like direct line firing these trebuchets, especially when they changed like the gate, like the walled up
break
gate.
Down the wall. Yeah.
Like they've got these guys in like a horseshoe formation, basically around like 100-foot area, and they've got like
50.
Yeah,
trebuchets going.
Well, and like trebuchets are not accurate weapons.
Yeah, no, it's not like firing a cannon.
No, and they make it seem like the trebuchets are going like the flaming balls that they're launching are direct line shots into this one gate. Like you can't do that. Trebuchets don't fire like that. You can only fire them in some type of an arc, which is adjustable to a certain extent. But you are not saying, hey, you see that window right there? Let's put a trebuchet ball, rock like through it.
Well, in the night before when they're firing flaming shots, it's basically a World War II bombardment.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like the walls are all shaking and the whole city is shaking, and yeah, that's probably a little dramatic when it's a giant stone ball hitting the wall.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's scary, but it's you're just not giant explosions everywhere.
No, yeah, exactly. It's not like mortar fire.
No.
But the way the battle takes place is they don't break through those gates, and so they do shift to another part of the wall that they have identified as being weaker along the Mount of Olives. And in the movie, they do. I mean, we just talked about it. They do it as this like walled up gate.
Right. It's like an old gate that's been bricked up.
You're right, and so it's weak. They say it's weaker, and I didn't see anything that said that specifically. But maybe you have read it.
I've never read that specifically.
But more or less, they find a weaker part of the wall where they're gonna do it, and they mine it. They have all of their catapults and trebuchets, like knocking it down. And I read one account they were using Greek fire, which is like this crazy ancient napalm, or, Crusader Byzantine napalm that no one it's kind of like Roman concrete. No one knows really how they made it. Like we have napalm now, which is like our creation of Greek fire. Like you can't put out with water, and it's sticky and it moves and stuff like that. But like no one really knows what Greek fire is.
Right, and we see it pop up enough in odd places that we wonder if it's just like a broad term for they used fire
or
some kind of incendiary or something. Because Greek fire was this. Like you say, it was a thick liquid that was usually sprayed out of like a copper pump in naval battles.
Yeah,
but
in the water a lot of
right,
the time.
You would spray it all over ships and on the water because the water couldn't put the fire out.
Right.
So you use it to defeat enemy ships. But it pops up all over the place. It's like using Greek fire. Like these people didn't even...
It's a state secret
of
the Byzantine Empire.
So like how could these... But regardless, it's some kind of incendiary
at
the time.
So they break the walls down.
Yeah.
And this is the famous scene in the movie where they basically recreate the famous Crusader painting that was on your book that you...
well,
I can't remember what the title of it is. It's like...
The History of the Crusades.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. But they breach it. But like the way... And you see this in the movie, it's accurate. When you breach a wall, it doesn't... Like the material doesn't go away.
Right.
Yeah, like it's basically a big mound that's just no longer a wall.
Yeah, a big mound of rubble.
Yes, and so there is a massive, massive battle where they're down to like 20 knights and a couple hundred soldiers, and they basically all day long keep the Muslims out of the city of Jerusalem, which is insane. When you really look, Saladin has the largest army he's ever assembled. They can't break through this wall in Jerusalem against a few hundred actual fighting men. Maybe there were more, non-traditional fighting men actually there helping and stuff like that. But they can't do it. They do not break through. And then we'll just get into like the negotiations that they do and kind of start wrapping it up a little bit. But the Muslims don't take Jerusalem by force.
Right.
Which is the whole point they're there in the first place. And if they did it long enough, they could have.
Oh yeah, they would. Eventually, they would have overwhelmed them.
Right.
They would have run out of it. And because the period it takes place is not even that long. It's not like they besieged it for 2 years.
No, so like a week and a half.
Right. And by siege, standards, that's pretty darn short for a major city.
Yes.
You see sieges that last in some places well over a year. Certainly months are within a reasonable amount of time.
But this is credit to Saladin as a human being. His force wants to take Jerusalem by force. They want retribution and justice for what happened in 1099. Deep down, he knows, that's not good. That's not a good thing.
Right.
We're going to go in there and start killing innocents again. It's going to get out of hand. I'm going to lose control of this army.
Could trigger another crusade. The word will get back to Europe that we massacred.
Yeah, well, there's still Tripoli and Antioch and all of these other, the Byzantine Empire is still there. If we do bad stuff to these people, there will be retribution on us as well.
Well, and if we find out that the only option is that we break in and kill you, no other city will surrender without a fight. Right. We'll have to take them all by force because they'll say, well, this guy doesn't negotiate.
Right. In the movie, in the extended edition, there's a scene about how Balian talks to Sibylla and he's like, oh, you're no longer queen. And she says, well, I'm still the queen of Acre. I'm still the queen of this, which is true. But in the theatrical release, they make it seem like once Jerusalem falls, there is no more. There's nothing left. And Saladin has to conquer all those other places, right? So he can't destroy. It can't be a Pyrrhic victory here, right?
Right. He still needs an army.
And
he doesn't want every castle he comes to hold out to the last man, right? He wants them to be like, you know what? Maybe he'll let us go.
So he does want to take Jerusalem as peacefully as possible. So when Balian comes out and to negotiate with him, and basically says like, if you guys take this by force, we'll destroy everything. Yeah. We'll destroy the Dome of the Rock. We'll destroy the Holy Sepulchre. We'll kill all the Muslim people. You will not get Jerusalem. And Saladin's basically like, okay, well, let's do terms then.
Right. Yeah, let's do it.
And there is some back and forth, but they basically settle on like a number, and now I can't remember what it is, but it's like a number like to ransom everybody. Do you have the numbers?
I had the how many people is it? It's 10 dinars per person is roughly what the ransom was, and all the treasury in the city could get, it could get a pretty big chunk of the population.
I mean, they're melting candlesticks.
Right. It couldn't pay for everyone, but Saladin, again, always kind of the merciful guy.
Well, first off, they agree to those terms.
Yes, they agree to those terms. It's not like in the movie where he says you can all just go.
Right.
He
exactly.
says you can all go if you pay the ransom, and anyone that can't
Now
is sold into slavery. Yes.
Right.
So now he himself.
So this is a cool part about this part, because we know that there's about to be a lot, like thousands of people in Jerusalem who are about to go into slavery, and they pay the ransom, and those people straight up just get to leave. Then you
right. So then also there were, to your point, there were 3,000 Muslim prisoners from Crusader battles in the city who they could have threatened to kill them all. Right. Okay. Well, they were set free. So they paid however many, I don't know the exact number. They paid as much as they can with the ransom. Balian personally then covered an additional 7,000 from his own money. Then Saladin, he chose to pay. Or Saladin's brother was Saladin let a bunch go himself.
Right. Then his brother.
Right. Then his brother, who kind of saw like, oh man, Balian paid. Saladin let several go. He let a few other kind of high-ranking people go without paying ransoms. There was a former Byzantine queen living as a nun. He let her go.
Well, I know.
And so Saladin's brother was like, okay, give me 1,000 slaves. And then he set them all free.
Set them free.
A couple other commanders did the same thing.
Even more generals. Some of Saladin's generals did the exact same thing.
Some of his generals were, I'll take 500 and I'll free him. I'll take 700 and I'll free him.
Yeah.
And so they end up freeing thousands and thousands that couldn't pay the ransom.
Right.
Now, Saladin, I think finally he was allowed. He let an additional 1,000 go at the end. So in the end, though, you end up having, I don't know, somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 that couldn't pay the ransom that he let go. He basically was like, get out of here and just go. Now, in the end, you did have 15,000 that were sent into slavery.
Right.
Yes. You had about 7,000 men and 8,000 women and children went into slavery.
It's a very cool story. There are still tens of thousands of slaves.
But it's terrible. But, letting thousands go if they paid or couldn't pay in some cases, and then selling 15,000 to slavery, as terrible as that is, it's still kind of a far cry from massacring 70,000 people.
Absolutely.
As soon as you break in the gates.
I think I was thinking about this just yesterday when I was kind of doing some like quick research on it before we did the podcast and everything, and it just kind of hit me. I have no evidence, didn't read this, I have no idea, but they just flooded the slave market with all the Crusaders from Hattin. Right. They're like, what are we gonna do with 40,000 more Crusader slaves?
Could be part of it.
Maybe they're like, hey, it's a win-win. Like, we can just let them go, and we don't have to deal with them on the back end either. Because the one thing about slaves is they are 100% dependent on you to provide everything for them. And they've got more conquering to do. They can't have this basically army of slaves that they now have to figure out where they go when they're still on campaign.
Right. So they let a lot of them go, and again, it sounds. By our standards, it sounds terrible. Like, oh, he's so nice because he didn't enslave all of them. Well, anyone that could pay, plus about another, 5,000-6,000 that couldn't, he let go. By comparison, they start marching to other Crusader-held cities like Tyre, and they get there, and Antioch is one that they end up going to. These refugees that flee Jerusalem, when they get to Tyre, they're not allowed to go in, and the people of Tyre come out and rob them. They take all their possessions and tell them to keep walking to Antioch. And then a bunch of them, I'm not sure why they would go here, but a lot of them marched to Alexandria, which would be a Muslim-held city in Egypt, and Italian ships came to get them and told them, no, we're not going to take you if you can't pay. And then the governor of Alexandria essentially agreed to a contract to get them out of his city and get them sent back to Europe. And he paid the Italians to take them back. So essentially, the other Crusaders in the area just robbed them and told them to keep walking.
Yep.
And it was also another note. It was any Christian in Jerusalem whose family was native, right? Because not all Christians were from Europe. You did have native Christians. You have native Christians to this day in the Middle East. They were all allowed to stay. It was only people whose descent was from Europe that had to pay the ransom and and leave or get sold into slavery.
One little thing I read was that when Balian was defending the city, like during the siege when he showed up, now he was never crowned or anything like this, but apparently, like especially like the Muslim citizens of Jerusalem, the way they basically viewed Balian as king because of the position he held during the siege, and there was like they just thought. I mean, it was just kind of just like a cool little tidbit, about history is that like Balian kind of was king for a week.
Right. He ran everything there. So I think he got the nickname Kingmaker at one point.
Yeah,
because
the Eblins have the Kingmaker crown.
Now with Reynolds dead,
right,
and Guy in prison, they are the power base of the Kingdom of Jerusalem. Is the if the Eblins don't support you, you're not really going to go anywhere. Because there is still a Kingdom of Jerusalem, even though Jerusalem is lost.
Right.
There's bits and places here and there. Cyprus was always, I don't think it was part of it yet, but at times it would become part of it. And you always had odd relationships with the county of Tripoli and things like that. So
the movie does get a lot right, but it all, we haven't jumped in and out of the movie all that much, but the movie gets a lot right, but then little things that turn the movie into a different story are wrong. The Sibylla and Balian love story.
Right, their love story.
And then they get some things wrong, like, when Baldwin IV shows up to relieve Carrick is actually under siege when he shows up to relieve it.
Right, they didn't get there the exact same.
Right, exactly. Although that is a cool scene. I mean, that's a cool scene when you see the cross glistening and everything like that.
You see all the banners for the Turkish army or Egyptian army rather, kind of them marching up against each other is pretty cool. Yeah,
so I give it a pretty high grade as far as historical. I kind of like
the political events. Balian's life is way. It's a fictional story.
The story of Balian of Eblan fails miserably on the historical scale. The movie of Kingdom of Heaven as a more kind of like broad view scores pretty high.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty good. And even like at the Fall of Jerusalem, no, there was no scene where they negotiated the price of ransom and how many people but it captured the overall I guess moment of like Saladin just wanted them gone. Yeah, he was like, all of y'all get out of here, and they didn't go into the nitty gritty of it, but essentially it's like, look, I'm not asking to make yourself a martyr. I'm not trying to kill all of you, even though my men would love that.
Yeah,
it's like, all of you get out of here and go. We will just take the city.
Right.
There's a clip where they pull the Christian cross off of the Dome of the Rock. That really happened. I mean, a cross had been put up. It had probably been turned into a church. The Muslim army really did tear down the cross that was on the Dome of the Rock. And it was, again, by our standards, pretty rough. But compared to 100 years earlier where there was a citywide massacre and reports of ankle-deep mud in the streets. Ankle-deep blood in the streets. It was a relatively peaceful takeover of the city.
Yeah. I mean, another thing, going back to Balian, because it's all wrong, him and Sibylla do not run off together back to France.
Right. No. She's given leave after the fall of Jerusalem. She's given leave to go visit her husband in captivity, who is eventually released.
Yes.
And remains king of Jerusalem.
Yep.
Now, in the extended edition, you see him get released.
Oh, really? Well, does she shun him?
No. Him and Balian have a duel. In the extended edition, and it's actually kind of a cool sword fight. But yeah, he's mad at Balian and they fight, and Balian beats him but doesn't kill him.
Right,
leaves him like bloody in an alleyway. But a major scene left out. Obviously, that didn't happen.
Yeah, another thing that they get wrong in the movie.
But he does remain king of Jerusalem and married to Sibylla.
Yeah. So that kind of wraps up the movie as far as the historical story is concerned. So now we'll just kind of talk about some of the things in the movie that are wrong or things that we want to talk about, and that they got right, got wrong. But just kind of talk about movie stuff for a little bit. And one thing that in the movie, when the army's about to leave for Hattin, and Balian's basking underneath the palm tree for some praying, contemplating. I don't know what he's doing, but the Teutonic Knights, who are supposed to be Templars dressed up as Teutonic Knights.
Right, essentially.
The Teutonic Order didn't even form until after the fall of Jerusalem. They're like 1192 an acre or something like that is whenever the Teutonic Order comes down. And obviously the Teutonic Order's heyday is later on in Europe.
Right, yeah, and in Eastern Europe, not in the Middle East. They did send lots of knights.
They are down in the Middle East and they are fighting. But the order is not as big.
It was more kind of like the Spanish orders. The Teutonic Knight was always very German heavy, whereas the Templars and Hospitallers were Frankish heavy,
Right.
and focused on the Crusades. The Teutonics were kind of German heavy and focused on like what would German knights want to do, which is
Poland, Lithuania,
go to Eastern Europe, and just like you had Spanish knights focused on the Reconquista. So yeah, they wouldn't have been down there yet.
No. But I mean, that scene is a cool scene. It's like 3 or 4 on 1 and everything like that. But like, just there would be no Teutonic knights,
Right.
In the movie, so they get that wrong.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you kind of want to talk about the movie or anything?
I thought one interesting thing is, why would Saladin, once this peaceful takeover, I think that the feeling was that the Kingdom of Jerusalem is over when Saladin does this.
In the movie.
Well, no, but I'm saying even in real life, like he's conquering it. It's done. The only thing that saves the Kingdom of Jerusalem is Richard the Lionheart shows up with the Third Crusade as a reaction to the fall of Jerusalem. And he's able to reestablish a thin strip on the coast.
Right. He retakes Acre.
Right. Which remains the capital for another 100 years until the final fall. And so that actually kind of saved it. But Saladin came very close to being the guy that ended the Crusades.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, a different Egyptian sultan would be the guy that ends it. But I don't, obviously Richard did not show up in a town in rural France looking for Bailey and Amelia.
Yeah.
And in fact, they went on to be kind of rivals because we mentioned the Lusignans
that's what I was
fealty
gonna say.
to Richard the Lionheart.
Yeah.
So when he shows up, there's
the king of Jerusalem has fealty to the King of England.
right for some of the lands that he owns there. And so when Richard shows up, there I believe there's kind of a chance that like maybe Guy doesn't hold on to this thing, and the Evelyn's get their branch
Right.
or whoever it was that they were supporting.
They're trying to do Isabella again.
Yeah, and so. But Richard shows up and he's like, no, Guy's my man. Like nobody likes Guy but Richard. He's like, oh, Lusignans, my subjects. He's gonna, and so the Ebelins and Richard don't really get along.
I was gonna say, when you read about like Richard in the Holy Land and what he's doing, the Ebelins are always there helping,
right?
Because they are a Crusader family, and they want to reestablish the kingdom. And Richard at this point is really the only one who has any capability of doing that because, Barbarossa drowned, and then Philip is not Richard.
Yeah, he shows up and helps, and then immediately goes back to try and conquer Richard's lands.
There is a contingent of the Germans that stay with Richard.
Yep.
But it's really Richard's English army that is. I mean, well, they're French, but like
right. And militarily, Richard's involvement in the Crusades, it kind of hurt Saladin's his image as this military commander because.
Richard's is equal.
He meets Richard on the battlefield several times, and Richard almost always wins.
Mm-hmm. Richard doesn't have the capability to reconquer the kingdom of Jerusalem, but in a battle, Richard has the capability to beat him, and he does.
And he has one particularly large victory over Saladin, but he marches to Jerusalem I think 3 times, and all 3 times Richard turns back because he's like, we can't take this.
But he
negotiates a deal that allows Christians to go to the city.
Right.
I think they have to be unarmed and obviously can't cause trouble.
Yeah.
But
that's a big deal.
Right. Kind of an interesting tidbit too. We mentioned their horse archer base, Saladin's army. I believe at some points during the Third Crusade, there's like an arrow shortage, like because of the number of trees they've had to chop down for arrows.
Well, there aren't that many trees,
right? I always thought that was an interesting tidbit for history.
Oh, that was one little tidbit about the horns of Hattin, which you see this in a lot of horse archer battles. They've got camel shipments of arrows coming in to and from the front lines to refill all their quivers and things like that, so they can just continually fire on them nonstop.
Now, things about the movie that I didn't necessarily love. There's a couple moments throughout the movie that get a little artsy. Mm-hmm. And so the first one I think of is when they get ambushed in the woods at the beginning of the movie, and the German guy gets hit in the neck with the arrow, and you think he's dead, right?
Yeah.
Then they're all fighting, and the fighting's whatever. We'll call it normal. Well, then suddenly the German guy stands up, which is fine. But then it gets kind of blurry, and it goes from battle sounds to like rock music.
Like,
and he's like charging like, and you're like, what's going on now? Like, is this like a Quentin Tarantino film all of a sudden, or? And so I thought that was kind of odd. When he's in the ship, it seems a little dramatic and poetic when the ships are all sinking. But then the one that stands out the most to me, and I think this is in the theatrical version, not just extended. When Balin gets to Jerusalem, he specifically wants to go to the Temple Mount, right? Like the location where Jesus was supposed, I believe, or was crucified, the Temple Mount, or the Temple Mount's kind of an area where you have the Wailing Wall and the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah.
And I believe it's also roughly the area where
it's like where Golgotha is. It's like where Jesus was crucified.
It's where Jesus was crucified. It's the hill where he was crucified.
Yeah.
Golgotha. I couldn't remember the word. And he stands there hoping he'll feel something. Because along with the political side, the movie follows, Bailey's personal growth, and his faith. Because there's even a moment where he says, "I've lost my faith." He like flat out says that, So anyways, he's sitting on the hill. And he looks out, and it like pans across the stars, and then all the people that are walking around turn into like these fast-moving, blurry phantoms.
That's weird too.
And so
it's like a time lapse.
Yeah, exactly. And so throughout the movie, there's a couple things like that get a little odd. I'm like, that just didn't fit with the feel of the movie.
No, I agree. But overall, I ranked
it last seconds. So it's not that bad.
Oh, another one of the things that Edward Norton plays Baldwin the Fourth.
He does.
Yeah.
You never see him.
No, and one of the things that they do get wrong that I kind of hit him on, which I get because it's a movie and you don't really want to look at a leopard like you're watching like House of Dragon, right? And his face is rotting, and it's pretty gross, is that in real life, they never hit it. He always was...
he didn't wear a mask.
I mean, he wore bandages,
right?
But he never wore a mask. He was always open-faced and everything like that. And by then, he's blind and everything's pretty gross and like that. But...
two more cast shout-outs. You see more of them in the extended edition. One of them only in the extended edition. You have Craster from Game of Thrones, the guy who lives with all his wives.
Yeah.
And, he is he's the older brother of Liam Neeson. He sends them in to ambush them in the woods. The
bishop guy or whatever?
Well, no, the
count of that area.
Yeah, he's the count. So in the regular edition, it says, "I'm charged by the bishop," which is Jaime Lannister.
Right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Once again, Jaime Lannister.
Yeah, Jaime Lannister, the other shout-out. It's his dad. In the extended edition, he says, "I'm charged by my father, the Lord, to arrest you." And what that is the older brother, Lord, of Liam Neeson is jealous that his younger brother has outdone him. And so he says, okay, he just showed up. He's got no kids, and he's looking for this blacksmith.
He wants his...
Right. He's like, if he dies childless, you get all his lands in them. And so he sends, we'll call him Jamie. He sends Jaime Lannister and a party of men with the excuse of Bailey murdered a priest, which is true.
True.
To get them in the woods. So little cameo shout-outs to some of the Game of Thrones cast.
Yeah, that's funny. But, I mean, anything else you really want to hit on or talk about before we kind of just wrap it up?
I don't think so. I think overall it just does a really good job for a medieval film. I mean, there just aren't too many out there that are Academy Award-winning level, even good ones that are really at that level in my opinion.
Yeah,
I don't know if it won any Academy Awards. But...
No, I didn't. I don't think it did all that great at the box office and everything like that. But I love the movie. I think it's great. It's not like overly gritty, but it has the real feel that it needs to.
Yes.
It's nothing's like super shiny. Nothing. It just feels great. I love the movie. I love watching it.
Right.
Although like we talked about, it's kind of like it's better than Braveheart, but they still get a lot of things wrong. But I love the movie, so I try. I don't want to hit it too hard, but really they do get enough wrong for it to not be that historically accurate.
No, but I do think that they put a lot of, I don't know, pretty close things in there. That the things they get wrong, it's to like creep the plot along.
Yeah.
Like Guy murdering the envoy that flat out didn't happen.
Right.
But
right.
And we know exactly what happened in that moment, but they need a villain, so they make Guy the villain.
Right. And I mean, Bailey and Sibylla were not lovers.
Right.
We know that didn't happen. Like
Bailey is not an orphan blacksmith.
No, really the main thing that it can get hit on for historical accuracy is Balian.
Right.
Because he is well documented as to what he was doing and where he came from and all those things, and they basically just throw it out the window, which is frustrating for me because I understand the redemption story, but like Balian's a key figure in the Kingdom of Jerusalem. That's a cool story too.
Right. They could have just had another knight. I don't know.
I don't know.
Not have to be Bailey a bit evil.
Yeah. I mean, then it becomes historical fiction.
Yeah.
And not anyways. Yeah. But I still love the movie. Recommend it to anybody who wants to watch good Crusader film or like that. So I think that's going to kind of wrap it up for this episode of the Based on History podcast. And appreciate everybody who listens. I know it's been a while since our last episode. After the new year comes in, I'll be working be a little bit more regular once again. And appreciate everyone who follows us on Instagram. You can follow us on Spotify. I always appreciate everybody hitting the follow, like, and subscribe buttons. And we'll see you next time on the Based on History podcast. Adios.